Emma leaned in, her heart racing as the video played. The timestamp showed earlier that day. They watched as the principal walked into the bathroom. A few seconds later, another figure entered, a student, but the camera angle wasn't clear enough to show their face. Then, the door swung open again, and a blur of movement rushed out. Emma. She felt a shiver go through her. That was her, running in fear. Then, something unexpected happened. The principal stepped out of the bathroom and looked around, making sure no one was watching. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled something out, a small object, barely visible on the screen. He looked down at it for a moment, then slipped it back into his jacket and walked away like nothing had happened. Emma's mind raced. What was that? Mr. Harris rewound the footage and zoomed in as much as possible. It was grainy, but they could make out the shape. A phone. Emma's breath caught. The student, they were recording him. Mr. Harris nodded, and he took their phone. Everything suddenly made sense. The principal wasn't just trying to scare someone, he was trying to cover up evidence. That phone had proof of whatever he had done in there. A noise in the hallway made Emma jump. Footsteps, heavy ones. Mr. Harris quickly closed the video. "We need to go," he whispered. Emma's heart pounded as they slipped out of the room, locking it behind them. Just as they turned the corner, she spotted him. The principal. He was heading toward the security office. Mr. Harris gently grabbed Emma's arm and led her in the opposite direction. "We can't let him know we were in there," he whispered. "But now we know, he's hiding something." Emma felt a new determination rise in her. The principal had taken that student's phone because it had the truth. If they could figure out who it belonged to, they could expose everything. The next day, Emma watched closely as students moved through the hallways. She paid attention to the ones who seemed on edge, who avoided eye contact, who flinched whenever the principal walked by. And then she saw it. A girl sitting alone at lunch, staring down at her hands, her expression tense. Emma walked over and sat down beside her. "Hey," she said softly, "I think I know what happened." The girl's head snapped up, fear in her eyes. "What?" Emma glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "Your phone," she whispered. "The principal took it, didn't he?" The girl's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. "He said if I told anyone, I'd regret it." Emma reached out and squeezed her hand. "You're not alone. We're going to stop him." That afternoon, with Mr. Harris' help, they went to the school board with the security footage and the girl's statement. Everything unraveled from there. The missing phone was found in the principal's office, and when it was unlocked, the truth came out. By the end of the week, the principal was gone. As Emma walked through the hallways, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Relief. Justice had been served, and for the first time, the school felt safe again. She looked over at Mr. Harris, who gave her a small nod. She smiled back. Sometimes, the people who clean up the mess aren't just janitors. Sometimes, they're the ones who make things right. The air in the subway car felt heavier now, thick with the weight of unspoken words. The man in the suit, who just moments ago had seemed so sure of himself, now shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His eyes darted between the badge and the man holding it, realization slowly sinking in. He wasn't dealing with just another passenger. This was someone with power, someone who could change the course of his day, or worse, his life. The stranger didn't break his gaze. He wasn't angry, at least not in the way most people would be. There was no yelling, no threats, just a quiet, unwavering authority that made it impossible to look away. Maya, still standing, could feel her pulse racing. She didn't know who this man was exactly, but she could tell one thing: he wasn't the type to back down. The train jolted slightly as it sped through the underground tunnel, the dull screech of metal against metal filling the silence. More passengers were watching now, their curiosity outweighing their fear of getting involved. A woman near the front, holding a little boy's hand, looked between the two men with cautious interest. An older gentleman who had been reading his newspaper now had it lowered in his lap, his gaze fixed on the unfolding scene. The suited man swallowed hard. "Look, I didn't mean anything by it," he muttered, shifting in his seat. I had a long day, all right." His tone had changed. The arrogance was slipping, replaced by something else. Discomfort, maybe even fear. The stranger let out a quiet breath, shaking his head slightly. "A long day," he repeated, as if testing the words. "She's pregnant and standing on a moving train. Think her day's been easy." Maya felt the weight of those words hit her. It wasn't just about this one moment. It was about all the times she had been ignored, dismissed, or overlooked. The times she had walked into a store and been followed for no reason. The times people had assumed things about her before she even spoke. This wasn't just about a seat. The man in the suit exhaled sharply, running a hand through his neatly combed hair. He was struggling, but whether it was with guilt or just frustration at being called out, no one could tell. "Fine," he finally said, standing abruptly. "Take the seat." His voice was still sharp, but there was no fight left in it. Maya hesitated for a second before lowering herself carefully onto the seat. Relief washed over her, but it was mixed with something else, a strange, bitter taste left behind by the whole encounter. The man in the suit turned toward the stranger, his jaw clenched. "Happy now?" he asked, voice laced with sarcasm. The stranger studied him for a moment, then simply said, "You should ask yourself that." His words hung in the air like an unfinished thought, one that didn't need explaining. The train continued on, but the energy had shifted. Conversations were whispered, glances were exchanged, and for once, it felt like people were truly seeing what had just happened, rather than brushing it aside. Maya let out a slow breath, pressing a hand against her belly as she felt her baby shift. She didn't know if she should say something to the stranger, thank him, or just let the moment be. But before she could decide, the train screeched to a stop. The doors slid open, and the suited man stormed out without looking back. No one stopped him. No one needed to. His departure said more than words ever could. Maya turned to the stranger, finding his eyes already on her. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying more emotion than she had intended. He gave her a small nod, then looked away, as if he didn't need or want the recognition. That was when Maya noticed something. There was something familiar about him, something she couldn't quite place. And then, just as the doors were about to close, a voice called out from behind. "Wait, was that?" Maya turned just in time to see a young man pointing at the stranger, his phone held up as if he had just taken a picture. The stranger sighed, shaking his head with a tired smile. The realization hit Maya all at once. She wasn't just sitting across from some good Samaritan. She was sitting across from someone far more important, someone the whole world knew. The tension in the train car transformed into a different kind of energy. People whispered, eyes widened, and suddenly, everything that had just happened took on a whole new meaning. And in that moment, Maya knew this story was far from over. The subway car, once heavy with tension, now buzzed with a different kind of energy. Whispers spread like wildfire, eyes widened in recognition, and phones discreetly lifted to capture the moment. The stranger, who had stepped in so calmly, so effortlessly, wasn't just any man. He was someone people knew, someone important. Maya felt her breath catch in her throat as she stared at him, piecing it together. She had seen his face before, on the news, in headlines, in viral videos that spoke of justice, integrity, and standing up for what's right. But here he was, just another passenger on a train, doing exactly what he had always done, defending those who couldn't always defend themselves. The young man with the phone took a step closer. "You're..." The stranger sighed, giving a small shake of his head, as if to say, "Let it go." But it was too late. The realization had already spread. Maya watched as people shifted, their gazes no longer filled with just curiosity but with admiration. The older gentleman with the newspaper gave an approving nod. The woman with the little boy leaned in and whispered something, and the child's eyes lit up. Even those who had remained silent throughout the confrontation now saw the moment for what it truly was, A lesson, a reminder that kindness and decency still mattered. The train jolted as it approached the next stop, and the stranger turned to Maya, his expression softening. "You okay?" She nodded, still processing everything. "I am now." The doors slid open, and this time, when he stepped toward the exit, no one tried to stop him. No one needed to. His actions had spoken louder than any name ever could. Just before he disappeared onto the platform, Maya called out, "Wait." He turned, one eyebrow raised. She swallowed, choosing her words carefully. "Why did you do it?" A small smile played on his lips. "Because someone was watching." Maya frowned slightly, glancing at the phone still clutched in the young man's hand. "You mean?" But the stranger shook his head. "Not them," he said, glancing down at her belly. "Him." Maya's heart clenched as she instinctively placed a hand over her stomach. Her baby. Before she could respond, the doors slid shut, and the train pulled away, leaving her with a thought she would carry forever. The world had seen what had happened today. The internet would talk, videos would spread, and people would have their opinions. But the most important witness was someone who hadn't even been born yet. And that, more than anything, made her believe in the power of moments like these.